Some maps are not drawn on paper. Some paths are not meant to be seen. And some names are never written down because speaking them alone was enough to make powerful men afraid. In the deep swamps and red clay hills of Georgia, plantation owners once believed they owned everything. Land, crops, time, and people. They believed control was permanent. They believed fear would last forever. They were wrong. By the early 1850s, whispers began spreading across Georgia. Not loud enough for courts. Not clear enough for newspapers. But strong enough to reach plantation offices and slave patrol camps. People were disappearing. Not crops. Not animals. People. Men and women vanished from fields. Children were gone from cabins. Entire work crews melted into forests that white men refused to enter. Dogs lost trails. Guns found no targets. Trails ended at water that seemed to swallow footsteps. And behind every disappearance was one name. The ghost of the swamps. They said he could walk through marshes without leaving a mark. They said he knew when the rivers would rise before the clouds arrived. They said he could make 10 people disappear where only one path existed. But his real name was Marcus. And this is how he learned to become a ghost. Marcus was born in 1819 on a small tobacco plantation near Augusta, Georgia. His mother Ruth had been brought south from Virginia only a few years earlier. She was quiet, observant, and careful in ways others were not. Marcus' earliest memories were of dirt. Not play dirt but learning dirt. Ruth would kneel beside their cabin and trace slow lines in the ground. She showed him how rainwater moved downhill. How some plants meant water was close below. How ants avoided certain soil because it flooded after storms. She never said why. She just taught. When Marcus was 7 years old, everything changed. One morning his mother was told she had been sold. No warning. No explanation. By nightfall she and Marcus were on a wagon headed west toward Milledgeville. The journey took 3 days. Marcus barely spoke. He watched. The color of the soil shift from red to pale. Pine forests thinning. Creeks appearing then vanishing. He did not know it yet, but his mind was mapping survival. The new place was Hartwell Estate. Over 3,000 acres. More than 200 enslaved people. It felt like a small city surrounded by wilderness. Marcus and his mother worked the fields. Long days. Heavy heat. But the work placed him outside. And Marcus noticed everything. Which fields flooded after storms. Which paths dried first. Where work ended and wild land began. He noticed something else too. The overseer never went near the western boundary. The ground there turned soft. Trees twisted. Water hid under grass. White men stayed away. Marcus remembered. When he was 11 his mother spoke to him quietly near the trees. You notice things, she said. That is good. But never let them know. She told him that appearing simple was protection. That knowledge was dangerous if seen. That survival sometimes meant pretending not to understand. Marcus nodded. 6 months later he understood fully. One night he woke to a hand over his mouth. His mother was dressed in dark cloth. A small bundle on her back. Her eyes steady. I love you, she whispered. Be smart. Remember the land. Then she was gone. At dawn the dogs came. They tracked her for 11 miles. Across rivers. Through swamps. Over ground that should have hidden her. She went farther than anyone before her. But fear always brings numbers. They found her exhausted in a creek bed. Bare feet torn. Body shaking. They dragged her back. The punishment was public. 50 lashes. Everyone forced to watch. Marcus stood there. 11 years old. He did not cry. He did not look away. He memorized every sound. Every scream. Every face that showed pleasure. His mother lived for 3 weeks. Infection took her slowly. Her last words were quiet. Remember the roots. Read the land. After her death Marcus was sold again. This time to the coast. A rice plantation near Darien, Georgia. This land was different. Water ruled everything. Tides moved rivers backward. Marshes hid snakes and disease. Men died young here. Marcus expected death. Instead he found a teacher. His name was Josiah, an old man, once a sailor, enslaved after a shipwreck decades earlier. He survived by knowing what white men did not. The tides. Josiah taught Marcus that water could hide paths. That high tide opened roads invisible at low tide. That moon and wind mattered as much as maps. If you know the tide, he said, you can move unseen. Marcus listened, and learned. This was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story and want part 2, make sure to subscribe. Share this video so others can hear forgotten history. And comment below if you believe knowledge can become freedom. Part 2. The coast teaches you how to disappear. But the swamp teaches you how to return without being seen. By the time Marcus left the rice fields behind, he was no longer just surviving. He was learning how land itself could become a weapon. How water could erase tracks. How silence could be louder than chains. Josiah had told him the truth before he died. The country talks. You just have to listen. Marcus listened. He learned that at low tide, paths appeared where water ruled hours before. Mud flats stretched out like secret roads. At high tide, those same roads vanished as if they never existed. White men feared these places. Marcus memorized them. He learned the names of rivers without reading a single map. The Altamaha, the Satia, the St. Mary's. He learned how they bent and curved and split into smaller veins that settlers never bothered to understand. To them, water was an obstacle. To Marcus, it was a guide. He learned which barrier islands hid fresh water springs and which would kill you with thirst. He learned how the color of water changed with depth. Dark meant deep. Green meant safe. Brown meant trouble. When Marcus was 14, he watched Josiah help 3 people escape. It was done quietly. No shouting. No rushing. Josiah waited for a spring tide when the moon pulled the ocean high and strong. Just before dawn, he sent them out in a small fishing boat. They vanished. By the time white men noticed and organized a search, the tide had turned. Channels that existed hours earlier were now mud and grass. Dogs found nothing. Boats could not follow. 2 weeks later, Josiah died. Officially, it was fever. Marcus knew better. The night before his death, Josiah pulled Marcus close and spoke softly. Smell tells you when a storm is coming. Birds tell you where land is. Follow pelicans at dusk. And always listen to the water. Then the old sailor was gone. Marcus stayed 3 more years on the rice plantation. He worked until his muscles burned and his skin cracked. But he learned. Every creek, every tide, every sound the marsh made before danger. By 17, he could predict tides without looking at the moon. He could move through water silently. He could disappear for hours and return without questions. That made him valuable. And valuable people get sold. In 1836, Marcus was chained into a coffle and sold to a trader named Phelps. The journey inland lasted 2 weeks. Nearly 200 miles. Marcus watched everything. Main roads, side paths, river crossings, small towns where they stopped for water. Phelps sometimes took shortcuts through wilderness. Marcus memorized those too. He was connecting pieces. The coast to the interior. The swamp to the hills. In Macon, Marcus was sold again. This time to a cotton planter named Kendrick near the Ocmulgee River. Cotton was different. Dry heat. Endless rows. Dust instead of water. But the land still spoke. The plantation bordered a massive cypress swamp. The overseer called it Suicide Swamp. Marcus called it a door. On Sundays, Marcus told people he was checking traps or gathering plants. Which was true, but he was also mapping. The swamp was alive. Dark water stained like tea. Cypress knees rising like grasping hands. Spanish moss hiding depth and distance. Sounds everywhere. Splashes. Buzzing. Calls you could not place. Most people saw chaos. Marcus saw order. He noticed water marks on tree bark. He noticed plants that only grew on higher ground. He followed animal trails because animals always knew safe paths. Over months, the swamp revealed itself. Hidden roots. Solid ground beneath shallow water. Channels deep enough to float a small raft. Dangerous places marked by silence or sudden drops. Marcus tested everything. He learned 3 ways through the swamp. Each one different. Each one dependent on season and water level. When Kendrick died suddenly, the plantation was sold off. Marcus was sold again. This time to Thomas Grayson. Grayson paid a high price. The plantation was massive. 4,000 acres. Cotton fields stretching to the horizon. 120 enslaved people. To the east ran the Ogeechee River. A living road to the coast. To the west lay another swamp. North and south were creeks and pine forest. To Marcus it looked like a puzzle already solved. Grayson was educated, calm, Calculated. He believed himself fair. The overseer Howell was not. Howell ruled with fear, whips, passes, informants. Marcus watched. For 6 months he said nothing. Did everything asked. Became known as reliable, safe. But inside his head roots were forming. Blind spots. Patrol times. Who talked too much? Who could be trusted? The land was ready. And Marcus was almost ready too. If you want to hear how Marcus takes his first people into the swamp and becomes a legend, subscribe now. Share this story so it is never forgotten. And comment below if you believe land remembers those who listen. Part 3. Rivers remember footsteps even when men forget. Swamps remember secrets long after screams fade. And when knowledge begins to spread, fear always follows. The Ogeechee River changed twice a day. The ocean pushed into it like a slow-breathing animal, raising the water, hiding paths, then pulling back again to reveal what had been drowned only hours before. Marcus studied it the way a hunter studies prey. Every Sunday he walked its banks. He watched the water climb and fall. He learned how the moon controlled its moods. He marked places in his mind where a man could cross and live. There was one wide shallow stretch that became almost harmless at low tide. Water spread thin over gravel and sand. A careful man could wade across without being swept away. Another place was narrow but fast. Dangerous but possible for a strong swimmer even when the tide was high. And farther downstream a fallen tree formed a bridge when conditions were right. Miss the timing and it became a death trap. Marcus learned them all. To the west lay the swamp. 2 miles of dark water and twisted trees. White men would not enter it. They spoke of it like a curse. Marcus treated it like a classroom. He went in slowly, tested every step, learned which mud held weight and which swallowed it. He found markers. A lightning-split cypress that looked like a broken spine. Palmettos that meant higher ground. A clear spring hidden inside darkness where the water tasted sweet and cold. By the end of 1 year Marcus did not just know the plantation. He knew everything within 50 miles. He knew which neighboring plantations were brutal and which were careless. He knew the locations of free black settlements hidden on the edges of white maps. He knew where Quakers lived and which ones were willing to help. And eventually someone noticed him. Benjamin was 40, a carpenter, skilled, valuable, and afraid. Grayson's gambling debts were growing and skilled men sold for good money. One evening Benjamin spoke. "If I am wrong to ask," he said, "just say so and we never speak again." Marcus waited. "They say you know the swamp." Marcus answered carefully. "I hunt." Benjamin looked at him. "I think you do more than that. I think you are learning it for a reason." Marcus studied his face. Fear, intelligence, desperation. "Why are you asking?" "Because I am being sold next month. To Alabama. My wife will stay here. My children too. I would rather die trying to go north than live knowing that." Marcus decided in 3 heartbeats. "There is a way," he said quietly. "But you follow every word I say or you will die." He did not take Benjamin into the swamp. That would draw attention. Instead he taught him how to see it. Where the dead oak lies across the water. Where 3 cypress trees stand in line. Where the ground feels solid even underwater. How your feet will tell you when danger starts. He taught timing, weather, darkness, when to stop, when to wait. Benjamin left on a moonless night. The dogs found nothing. The swamp swallowed his trail like it had swallowed so many dreams before. Benjamin reached the far side. A free black family waited. Clothes, food, directions. Marcus never knew if Benjamin lived free. But hope was enough. Word spread. Quietly. 4 more escaped over 3 years. No pattern. No rush. Each route chosen carefully. One through swamp. One by river. One by forest. Then Charity arrived. 17. Educated. Sharp. Dangerous in a different way. She did not ask for a route. "Teach me," she said. Marcus resisted. Knowledge was risk. But Charity saw the bigger picture. She escaped and did not vanish. She learned more. She carried the knowledge north. When she sent word back that she had guided others successfully, Marcus understood. This was bigger than him. He began teaching others pieces. Never everything. A web, not a single thread. By 1843 the web covered 7 counties. Plantation owners noticed. Escapes were too clean, too smart, This is knowledge, one man said. They increased patrols, offered rewards, tightened chains, and then Charity returned, not as a runaway, but as something else entirely. If you want to hear what happens when the ghost of the swamps faces his greatest risk yet, subscribe now. Share this story so history is never buried. And comment below if you believe knowledge can break chains. Part 4. Fear does not arrive loudly. It creeps in, it watches, and when it finally moves, it does so with purpose. Charity did not return to the Grayson plantation openly. That would have been suicide. Instead, she sent word through a chain of whispers that reached Marcus one quiet evening near the riverbank. The message was simple but dangerous. They are watching harder now. But they do not see everything. We need to change how we move. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Charity's return meant risk. Any contact increased the chance of exposure. But it also meant opportunity. They met near the edge of the swamp at dusk. Charity looked older than her years. Harder. Her eyes carried knowledge earned through danger. You have built something powerful, she said. But it is too centered on you. Marcus knew she was right. If he was caught, the whole network would collapse. We need layers, Charity continued. Cells. People who know only what they need. If one falls, the rest survive. Marcus listened. For weeks they worked quietly. They reorganized the routes, broke them into segments. Each guide learned only one section. River guides did not know swamp exits. Forest runners did not know river crossings. Knowledge became fragments, harder to trace, harder to destroy. At the same time, pressure increased. The meeting in Savannah had consequences. New patrols rode at night. Dogs were trained harder. Rewards were posted quietly in towns for information about anyone helping runaways. Howell became suspicious. He noticed Marcus still took long walks on Sundays. He noticed people speaking to him and then leaving suddenly. He watched. One night Howell followed him. Marcus sensed it before he saw him. The swamp went quiet in a way it only did when danger approached. Birds stopped calling. Insects faded. Marcus changed direction without looking back. He entered the swamp at a point he had never shown anyone. A path that only existed for minutes after sunset. Howell followed until the water reached his knees. Then his fear stopped him. Marcus disappeared. From that night forward, Marcus knew time was running out. Charity brought worse news. Slave catchers from South Carolina had begun comparing notes with Georgia patrols. Routes were being discussed. Patterns guessed at. Someone had suggested a guide existed. A ghost. Marcus. They need proof, Charity said. And they will find it eventually. Marcus began planning something bigger. Riskier. Not an escape. A misdirection. In early 1844 he allowed a false route to leak. A partially true path that led into a dead-end swamp basin. He seeded the information carefully through someone he knew would talk. 2 weeks later a man attempted to escape using the false route. Marcus hated himself for it. But the man survived. Marcus had ensured there was a way back if followed carefully. The patrols rushed in. Dogs lost trails. Men wandered for days. One patrolman nearly drowned. Another was bitten by a snake. The swamp fought back. The rumor spread among white men that the swamp was cursed. That something lived there. Fear shifted outward instead of inward. But Howell was not convinced. He interrogated people, whipped 2 men nearly to death, searched cabins, found nothing. Then he watched Marcus more closely. Marcus reduced activity. No escapes for nearly a year. The network held steady but quiet. In the summer of 1845 tragedy struck. A young guide named Elijah made a mistake. He trusted the wrong person. A man who promised silence but wanted reward money. Elijah was captured. Marcus heard the news at dawn. Elijah would talk. Marcus had one choice. Disappear. Charity argued they should flee together. If you go north now you live, she said. Marcus shook his head. If I leave they will tear this place apart looking for what I built. People will die. He decided to stay. That night Marcus erased himself. He destroyed landmarks he had taught others. Moved markers. Flooded paths by opening beaver dams. Changed the swamp. When Elijah was brought back broken and bleeding he told them what he knew. A ghost. Roots. A man named Marcus. Howell stormed Marcus's cabin. It was empty. Marcus had vanished into the swamp. The search lasted weeks. Dogs failed. Men quit. Patrols refused to enter deep water again. Eventually Grayson declared Marcus dead. But the network lived. Charity took over coordination from the north. Guides continued moving people quietly. And in the swamp a man walked paths only he knew. Watching. Waiting. If you want part 5 where the ghost becomes a legend feared across Georgia, subscribe now. Share this story so it survives. And comment below if you believe the land protects those who listen. Part 5. When a man disappears but his work continues, fear changes shape. It stops chasing bodies and starts hunting shadows. They told themselves Marcus was dead. Thomas Grayson needed that belief. Howell needed it even more. A living ghost was bad enough. A dead one that still caused people to vanish was something else entirely. The plantation returned to routine on the surface. Fields were worked. Bells rang. Whips cracked. But underneath everything had shifted. People listened more carefully. They watched the trees. They noticed water levels. They remembered what Marcus had quietly taught them. Marcus was not gone. He lived inside the swamp now. He had prepared for this long before he vanished. Deep inside the cypress maze he had built places to survive. Dry ground hidden beneath tangled roots. Shelters made from fallen logs and palmetto leaves. Food caches buried high above flood lines. Clay jars sealed with resin. The swamp was not his hiding place. It was his home. He moved only at night. During storms. During moments when the world felt loud enough to hide a heartbeat. He drank from clear springs no patrol knew existed. He trapped fish with woven reeds. He followed animal trails like old friends. White men searched at first. They brought dogs, guns, torches. The swamp took them apart. Dogs lost scent. Men sank knee-deep in black mud. Panic spread faster than reason. One patrolman fired wildly at a noise that turned out to be an owl. Another fell into deep water and barely survived. After 3 weeks Grayson ordered the search stopped. No man was worth this. That decision created the legend. Stories spread among white communities. The swamp eats men. The ghost still walks. You hear him but never see him. People claimed to hear footsteps where no one stood. Claimed boats moved at night without hands. Fear became its own prison. Meanwhile Marcus worked. He did not guide escapes directly anymore. That would be too dangerous. Instead he became something else. A signal. People would leave food in agreed places. A carved mark on bark. A twisted reed. Marcus would see it. Then adjust routes. Move markers. Change paths. Sometimes he intervened. Once he watched a patrol prepare to ambush a river crossing he had used years earlier. He waited until nightfall, then broke a beaver dam upstream. Floodwater surged. The crossing vanished. The patrol cursed and left. Another time he guided a runaway silently by sound alone. A stone tapped twice. A branch snapped once. No words. The network survived. But pressure returned. By 1847 plantation owners across central Georgia were furious. Losses continued. Not massive but steady. And every escape seemed clean. They brought in professionals. Slave catchers from Virginia. Men who had hunted humans for decades. Men who did not fear swamps. At first, these men studied patterns. Questioned everyone. Followed rumors. They noticed something important. Escapes stopped whenever patrols increased. Then resumed months later. Someone was watching them. The hunters realized the truth. The ghost was still alive. They set traps. False opportunities. Fake rumors of weak patrols. Marcus sensed something wrong but could not be everywhere. In early 1848 a young man named Caleb was caught. He knew only part of a route. But fear loosens tongues. Caleb broke. The hunters learned something new. Marcus lived in the swamp. That changed everything. They changed tactics. Instead of chasing they poisoned water sources they could find. Burned sections of forest. Left bait. Marcus lost 2 safe shelters. He nearly died when a spring he trusted was fouled. For the first time since his disappearance Marcus considered leaving Georgia. But then something unexpected happened. Charity sent word. Not from the north. From Savannah. She had returned south. Abolitionist networks were growing bolder. Ships now smuggled people north. Information moved faster. But Georgia was becoming too dangerous. We need you alive, Charity wrote. Not just here. They planned one final operation. Not an escape, an extraction. Marcus resisted. If I leave they will tighten chains again. Charity's answer was simple. They already are. But if you live your knowledge can spread farther than this swamp ever allowed. Marcus watched the swamp one last time. It had protected him, fed him, hidden him, but he understood something Ruth had taught him long ago. Survival is movement. In late autumn of 1848 Marcus left the swamp not by running but by flowing. He followed water north, moved only at night, changed routes constantly. Slave catchers searched for months. They never found him, but they kept hearing stories. Runaways who moved like they knew the land too well. Guides who taught without maps. Swamps that swallowed patrols. The ghost was gone, but the roots remained. If you want part 6 where Marcus carries his knowledge beyond Georgia and becomes a nightmare for the entire slave system, subscribe now. Share this story so it is never erased. And comment below if you believe freedom moves like water. Part 6. Some ghosts do not haunt one place. They travel, they learn new lands, and they carry fear with them. Marcus left Georgia the same way he had lived in it. Quietly, carefully, letting water carry him instead of roads. He did not move like a fugitive. He moved like a man who understood that land always remembers how to protect those who listen. For weeks he traveled north through rivers and forests. Sometimes alone, sometimes guided by hands he never saw. Charity's network worked like breath. Invisible but constant. He slept in abandoned cabins. In hollow trees. Under boats pulled high onto riverbanks. He ate sparingly. He trusted instincts more than plans. When he crossed into South Carolina something shifted. The land felt tighter. Patrols heavier. Fear thicker. Plantation owners here had heard stories. A ghost who knew swamps. A guide who trained others. Some did not believe. Others were already afraid. Marcus did not announce himself. He observed. He learned. The low-country swamps of South Carolina were wider and more brutal than Georgia's. Water stayed longer. Mud swallowed deeper. But the rules were the same. Animals knew safe ground. Trees marked flood lines. Water told stories. Marcus met others like him. Men and women who had learned pieces of survival on their own. A fisherman who knew tidal patterns. A woman who could cross forests without breaking branches. A preacher who memorized stars. They were isolated sparks. Marcus brought structure. He did not tell them his name. He taught methods. How to test ground. How to read weather. How to vanish without panic. Slowly a second network formed. Then something darker followed. In 1849 a group of professional slave hunters tracked a family north through South Carolina. They vanished near a swamp Marcus had mapped weeks earlier. The hunters entered confident. Only 2 came out. One had lost an eye. The other would never speak again. Stories exploded. White men began refusing swamp work entirely. Patrol routes changed. Areas once guarded were abandoned. Fear widened the cracks. Marcus moved again. North Carolina next. Here the terrain changed again. Hills. Dense forests. Rivers colder and faster. Snow sometimes dusted the ground in winter. Marcus adapted. He learned new signs. How frost settles on safe paths first. How animals cluster before storms. How sound travels farther in cold air. He made mistakes. Once he nearly froze crossing a river too late in the season. Another time he trusted the wrong man and barely escaped capture. But every failure sharpened him. By 1850 Marcus reached Virginia. The irony did not escape him. His mother had been taken from here. Now he returned carrying something slavery feared more than rebellion, knowledge. Virginia plantations were older, systems tighter, patrols smarter, but also slower to adapt. Marcus found Quaker communities who had grown bolder. Underground routes were stronger here. Boats crossed rivers nightly. Wagons rolled by day carrying cargo that breathed. Marcus trained guides instead of leading escapes himself. He knew his face had become dangerous. He taught people how to teach others. That was the true threat. By 1851 whispers reached Georgia again. Escapes were increasing, not just in one place. Everywhere. Men crossed rivers no one believed possible. Swamps swallowed patrols whole. Dogs failed again and again. Plantation owners panicked. Meetings were held. Laws tightened. Rewards doubled. They blamed abolitionists. They blamed Northern agitators. They blamed each other. They never realized the truth. There was no single route anymore. No single guide. Marcus had become an idea. In the spring of 1852, slave hunters finally caught a man in Virginia who knew too much. Under torture he spoke one name. Marcus. The hunters followed rumors north. Too late. Marcus crossed into Pennsylvania under heavy rain. He stood on free ground for the first time and felt nothing like victory. Freedom without others felt unfinished. He did not settle. He taught. In small rooms. In barns. In churches. In whispers. He trained former runaways to return south as guides. To carry knowledge back like seeds. The ghost of the swamps died there. Something larger was born. A system that could not be captured. A map written in minds not paper. A language spoken by land and water. When war came years later, white officers would complain about slaves disappearing behind Union lines with impossible precision. They would never understand why. Marcus never wrote his story. No photograph survived. No grave bears his name. But the swamps still remember. If you want part 7 where the legend collides with the coming Civil War and fear reaches the highest levels of power, subscribe now. Share this story so the past speaks. And comment below if you believe some ghosts are meant to guide the living. Part 7. When fear reaches the powerful, it stops whispering. It starts shouting. And by the time it screams, the damage is already done. By the late 1850s, the South was restless. Plantation owners argued in meetings and newspapers. Patrol budgets grew. New laws tightened movement. Punishments became harsher. But none of it stopped what was happening. People were still disappearing. Not in crowds. Not in chaos, but cleanly, quietly, as if the land itself had decided to open doors. White men blamed abolitionists. They blamed Northern money. They blamed spies. But deep down many of them feared something worse. They feared understanding, because escapes were no longer reckless. They were skilled. People crossed rivers at the right hours. Traveled during storms. Vanished into swamps patrols avoided. Someone had taught them how to think. Marcus was no longer in Georgia or Virginia. But his shadow was everywhere. By 1858 his methods had reached Alabama, Mississippi and Louisiana. Swamps there were thicker. Rivers wider. But the rules were the same. Listen to the land. Let water erase you. Never fight terrain. Become part of it. When talk of war began, the fear deepened. Southern leaders worried not just about armies but about what enslaved people would do if chaos came. They remembered Haiti. They remembered whispers. Secret meetings were held among plantation elites. They demanded more patrols, more militias, more violence. But violence does not stop knowledge. When the Civil War began in 1861, everything cracked open. Young white men left plantations to fight. Overseers were stretched thin, patrols weakened, and suddenly the land had more voices moving through it than ever before. Marcus had predicted this. Years earlier he had taught people to watch not just weather but politics. He told them power always leaves gaps when it moves. Those gaps became doorways. As Union armies pushed south, enslaved people vanished ahead of them. Not randomly, not blindly, they moved like guided water. Union officers were stunned. Entire labor forces disappeared overnight. Camps filled with people who arrived already organized, already fed, already knowing where to go. How did they find us? One officer asked. No one had an answer. Some said angels. Others said spies. A few whispered about a ghost. Behind the lines Marcus worked quietly. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray. His body carried scars of cold and hunger. But his mind was sharper than ever. He advised abolitionist groups on how to move people safely. He trained scouts to read terrain. He warned Union commanders where swamps would swallow men and where rivers could be crossed. But he never took credit. In 1863 the Emancipation Proclamation spread hope like fire. But freedom on paper did not mean safety on land. Confederate patrols still hunted. Guerrilla groups formed. Violence increased. Marcus returned south one last time. Not to Georgia, to Mississippi. Reports came of slave catchers murdering runaways even after Union victories. Marcus could not ignore it. He moved through enemy territory like smoke. He guided families out at night. led groups through flood zones that erased trails by morning. He sabotaged patrol routes by altering waterways. Once he lured a Confederate unit into a swamp basin just before heavy rain. They were trapped for 2 days. No shots fired. Fear did the work. By 1864 his legend reached Confederate leadership. Orders circulated warning soldiers about swamp guides. About invisible routes. About men who seemed to appear and vanish. One officer wrote in a letter that the land itself had turned against them. Marcus knew the war would end soon. But he also knew freedom would not mean safety for everyone. After the war he disappeared again. Some say he moved west. Others say he died quietly near water. A few claim he returned to Georgia and walked the swamps once more. No one knows. What is known as this. After the war many newly freed people traveled with strange confidence. They knew where rivers could be crossed. Which forests hid paths. Which swamps protected instead of killed. No maps explained it. But the land remembered. And so did the people. If you want part 8 where the ghost fades from history but his influence shapes generations, subscribe now. Share this story so forgotten voices speak again. And comment below if you believe freedom always leaves footprints even when history tries to erase them. Part 8. History does not erase ghosts. It buries them. And sometimes the ground keeps breathing. When the war ended the noise faded slowly. Cannons stopped. Flags changed. Laws were rewritten. But the land did not change its memory. Swamps still whispered. Rivers still rose and fell. And people who had once moved only at night now walked in daylight carrying habits learned in fear. Marcus was gone. No one announced his death. No grave was marked. No paper recorded his final breath. For some he had become a rumor. For others a lesson passed quietly from mouth to ear. Reconstruction brought hope and danger together. Freedom existed on paper but not always in practice. Night riders replaced patrols. Old overseers became new enforcers. Violence learned new disguises. But something had shifted forever. People knew how to leave. Families who had lived for generations on one piece of land suddenly traveled with confidence. They knew which creeks stayed shallow in spring. Which forests hid sound. Which swamps protected instead of killed. White men noticed. They complained that freed people vanished too easily. That laborers left plantations without warning. That workers walked off debts and threats like they meant nothing. They never understood why fear no longer worked the same way. Because fear loses power when people know the exits. Across Georgia and the Carolinas children grew up hearing strange advice. Watch the birds before dusk. Smell the air before rain. Follow water but never trust it blindly. No one said Marcus's name. But the knowledge survived. In small black communities elders taught young men how to move through land quietly. Women taught children which plants meant water nearby. Fishermen shared tide knowledge that had once been forbidden. It was survival culture. White historians ignored it. They wrote about battles and laws. About presidents and generals. They did not write about swamps. But the swamps remembered. In the 1880s a railroad survey crew near the Ogeechee River vanished for 2 days. They emerged shaken claiming the swamp twisted paths and erased sound. Locals laughed quietly. In the early 1900s hunters complained dogs would not track in certain areas. That trails ended at water that felt wrong. Old people smiled. The ghost became folklore. Children dared each other to walk swamp edges at night. They spoke of a tall man who moved without sound. Who guided lost travelers away from danger. Who punished cruelty by turning land against it. The stories changed shape, as all true stories do. But something real stayed inside them. During the Great Migration black families leaving the South often traveled strange routes. Avoided main roads. Used rivers and forests even when trains existed. They carried habits older than maps. During World War II Southern training camps reported soldiers getting lost in nearby wetlands. Locals warned them. Soldiers laughed. Some never laughed again. Land cannot be conquered by arrogance. Only learned. In the 1960s during the civil rights movement activists moving through rural Georgia relied on local guides who knew back roads and woods. Routes that avoided hostile towns. Paths that kept them alive. Those guides never credited books. They credited elders. And elders credited land. Marcus had become something larger than a man. He had become a way of thinking. A refusal to accept the paths handed to you. A belief that freedom requires skill, not just courage. Historians searching records found nothing. No Marcus listed among freedmen rolls. No death certificate. No photograph. It bothered them. How could one man affect so much without leaving proof? The answer was simple. He did not leave paper. He left practice. In modern times, environmental scientists studying wetlands noticed something curious. Certain paths through swamps showed signs of repeated human use centuries old. Routes that made no sense unless someone deeply understood water movement. They assumed indigenous origins. They were not wrong. Knowledge survives by blending. Marcus had learned from Africa, carried memory. From sailors. From animals. From land older than slavery itself. He returned that knowledge to the people. In the end, that was his greatest rebellion. Not escape. Education. Some ghosts rattle chains. Others break them quietly and walk away. If you want part 9 where the final truth about Marcus surfaces through a hidden record, subscribe now. Share this story so buried history breathes again. And comment below if you believe some lessons are meant to be passed, not written. Part 9. Sometimes the dead leave evidence. Not bones. Not names. But truth hidden where no one thought to look. In 1912 a flood hit coastal Georgia harder than anyone expected. Rivers burst past their banks. Swamps swallowed fields. Old land shifted in ways it had not in decades. When the water finally pulled back, it revealed something strange near the edge of the Ogeechee River. An old wooden chest had surfaced from deep mud. At first it looked like debris. A relic from a forgotten cabin. But a local black farmer named Isaiah noticed something others missed. The chest had been sealed with pine resin. Carefully, intentionally, Isaiah waited until night to open it. Inside were cloth-wrapped bundles. Dried and preserved by mud and time. When he unwrapped them, his hands shook. There were hand-drawn maps. Not plantation maps. Not property lines. Routes. Swamps marked not by danger but by safe paths. Rivers marked with times, not names. Symbols for high ground. For fresh water. For shelter. And pages of writing. Not elegant. Not educated in the formal sense. But precise. Notes about tides. About birds. About storms. About how to move unseen. At the bottom of one page was a name written once. Marcus. Isaiah did not show the chest to white officials. He showed it to elders. To people who understood what they were seeing. They knew. This was not a legend. This was instruction. The chest had likely been hidden during the war. Buried where only someone who knew the land deeply would think to hide it. The flood had uncovered what history had tried to bury. The elders debated what to do. Some wanted to destroy it. Knowledge like this had always brought danger. Others argued it needed to survive. In the end they chose memory over fear. The maps were copied by hand. The chest returned to the mud. The originals hidden again. The copies spread quietly. Decades later, during the Depression, families fleeing hunger used routes that felt familiar without knowing why. During segregation, black travelers relied on back paths that avoided towns where signs warned them not to stop. During protests, routes appeared that avoided police lines. During disasters, people found water when others could not. The knowledge moved like bloodline memory. White historians dismissed stories of a ghost of the swamps as folklore. Campfire tales. Children's stories. But occasionally something surfaced that made them uncomfortable. A Union officer journal describing guides who never missed a crossing. A plantation letter complaining about routes no map showed. A slave catcher report mentioning a man who moved like water. None could prove anything, but together they formed a shadow. In the 1950s, a young historian researching Underground Railroad activity in the South found references to unusually sophisticated escapes originating in Georgia swamps. He wrote a paper suggesting the existence of a coordinated Southern guide network independent of Northern abolitionists. The paper was rejected. Too speculative. Too inconvenient. History prefers heroes it can photograph. Marcus left none, but the land remembered him. In modern satellite imagery, researchers noticed faint linear disturbances in swamp vegetation. Lines that did not follow animal movement. Too straight. Too purposeful. Ancient trails. Used by humans who understood water cycles. They were never explained. Today the swamps of Georgia are protected wetlands. Tourists kayak through safe channels marked clearly. Rangers warn visitors not to leave paths. Sometimes guides mention local legends. A ghost, a man who taught the swamp to hide people, a protector of the lost. They laugh, but occasionally a ranger will admit something strange. That people who wander off trail often find their way back safely without knowing how. That sounds travel oddly at dusk. That storms sometimes seem to block only certain routes. The swamp chooses. Marcus never wanted fame. He wanted exits. He wanted children not born yet to inherit something stronger than chains. And they did. What he built could not be owned, could not be burned, could not be outlawed, because it was written in land. In the final years of his life no one knows where Marcus walked. Some believe he died near water as he lived. Others believe he simply faded into the knowledge he had created. But one truth remains. Whenever people move quietly through danger and survive because they understand the ground beneath them, Marcus walks with them. If you want the final part 10 where the full meaning of the ghost of the swamps is revealed and the story closes, subscribe now. Share this story so the truth is never buried again. And comment below if you believe some histories refuse to stay silent. Part 10. Some stories never end. They only change shape. And sometimes the end is only the beginning. Marcus was gone. That much was certain. No one had seen him in decades. No one knew where he slept. No one knew where he ate. But everything he had built continued to move, to guide, to protect. His knowledge was alive, not tied to flesh or face. It had become something larger than a man. By the time the 1870s came, the South had changed. Slavery had ended. Reconstruction tried to rebuild what had been broken. Freed people moved freely, yet danger remained. Night riders, corrupt officials, vigilantes who refused to accept the new laws. For many, survival still meant moving carefully, reading the land, trusting instinct. Marcus's teachings lived in them, even if his name was forgotten. The rivers and swamps, once pathways for escape from plantations, now became routes for families seeking work, children seeking school, entire communities seeking safety. Marcus had shown how the world could be read through water, through trees, through the movement of animals and wind. People did not know they were following a legend. They only knew they survived when others perished. Stories persisted. Old-timers whispered of a tall man in gray, moving silently through the swamps, guiding the lost. Some said he appeared only at night, and his eyes glowed like the moon reflecting on water. Others insisted that they heard footsteps when no one was there or saw the reflection of a man in rivers where no one had crossed. Children were warned not to follow the sounds. Adults remembered that when paths seemed impossible, sometimes someone invisible had already walked there. In the early 1900s, people began to find hidden caches left by Marcus. Food preserved in clay pots, instructions on how to move through flood zones, markings carved into trees that could guide someone for miles without alerting anyone watching. It was as if he had planned for a future he would never see, a world where his students would need the knowledge more than anyone ever did. During the Great Migration, families leaving the South relied on routes no one could explain. They found swamps safe, rivers passable, forests hiding them from danger. People traveled in groups, in secret, and they arrived intact where others thought escape impossible. Some guides carried sections of Marcus's maps memorized and passed them quietly to trusted hands. Routes spread across states like veins, linking freedom to survival. Knowledge had become a weapon and a shield, invisible yet unstoppable. Even during the civil rights era, guides and elders taught young people to move carefully, to read the land, to know where it was safe to go when authorities or hostile groups threatened. Marcus's influence survived quietly, without records, without acknowledgement. His methods had become culture, instinct, a living archive of survival. People called it folklore. They did not realize it was history breathing through them. The final proof of Marcus's genius came unexpectedly. In 1912, the flood along the Ogeechee River uncovered the chest hidden in mud and water, revealing hand-drawn maps, careful instructions, and notes about water, wildlife, tides, and swamps. Isaiah, the local farmer, understood immediately that this was not treasure or superstition. It was instruction, carefully preserved knowledge for generations. The chest had survived because it was hidden in a place only someone who knew the land as intimately as Marcus could imagine. When Isaiah shared it with elders, they copied the maps by hand, making sure the wisdom survived again, this time in a form the community could pass on. In that moment, Marcus's life was no longer just a story. It became proof that one person could create a network that survived centuries, that taught people to move, to survive, and to be free in ways that could not be captured on paper or in law. It became a story of hope, courage, and intelligence that transcended fear. Marcus's legend reached far beyond Georgia. By the 1920s and 30s, anthropologists and historians researching swamps, rivers, and the Underground Railroad noted strange routes that did not match known maps. They dismissed them at first as coincidence or exaggeration. Yet every trail, every unusual river crossing, every forest path led back to communities that had oral histories of a man who taught people to move unseen, who disappeared into swamps and rivers yet left instructions that saved lives. No photograph existed. No name appeared in official records except in whispers. And that was precisely the way Marcus had intended it. In the final analysis, the ghost of the swamps was never about fame. It was about survival, about knowledge passed silently, invisibly, so it could not be destroyed. Marcus's greatest rebellion was not one violent act. It was education, empowerment, and the ability to create freedom in minds and bodies of those who were trapped. The swamps, rivers, and forests remembered him because they had been his teachers, his allies, and his partners. His story proved that power could be challenged without confrontation, that intelligence and observation could outlast chains, armies, and laws. Even now, in modern Georgia, hikers and kayakers report strange occurrences. Trails appear in swamps that were never there before. Footprints seem to vanish before anyone can follow them. Rivers are easier to cross at some points and impossible at others. Locals share stories of a tall, quiet man who disappears when looked at directly. Some laugh, some shiver. All remember that freedom sometimes moves like water, like shadows, like whispers in the trees. Marcus became more than a man. He became a system, a network, a legend, and a ghost. And in every river crossed safely, every swamp navigated, every forest hidden path discovered, his legacy lives on. This is the truth. The ghost of the swamps is not just history. It is survival itself. A story of courage, intelligence, and invisible resistance. Every person who learned, taught, and moved carefully continued Marcus's work without knowing his name. Every generation passed it on. And so Marcus's ghost never truly disappeared. It only changed form, existing wherever knowledge met necessity, wherever freedom was more than a word. If you want people to remember the ghost of the swamps, share this story. Subscribe so history never forgets the invisible guides who made survival possible. Comment below if you believe some legends are meant to teach rather than haunt. The story ends, but the legend moves like water.